Hello, everybody, and welcome to the next episode of Dominion Academy. Joining me today will be Freaky. He'll be covering the next 10 points, and I'm going to be talking about the first 10 points here. So, there are a lot of mistakes Dominion players make, and it's a non-exhaustive list. There are certainly more points you could make, but I feel like these are the ones that would be the most beneficial to the most people. The first one, and I think a very important one that even very good players can sometimes miss, is that they don't buy enough draw cards. Obviously, to draw your deck, you need to have draw cards, and you do more in your turn when you buy draw cards. So, often I'll see players, they'll play their game, and they just decide they're not going to pick up draw cards, and they're just going to keep buying, I don't know, Poacher or this card or that card, and they just don't want to draw cards. And this happens a lot more with cards like Moat or Faithful Hound or villages like Festival. You know, people just think, well, the draw kind of sucks. I don't really want this draw, but you often still do. So that's just kind of the thing. Just always be aware if there's draw on the board, and always try and remember to draw cards if it is good for the deck, and it usually is. So, the second one is sort of related to the third one in terms of application. Both of them would be buying a province, as an example, but the second point is more to do with timing. You can play absolutely perfectly, but if you green too early, you're not maximizing the payload potential of your deck, and you're making your deck less consistent. I don't really have a specific point for this, really. You just have to kind of have the whole game state in mind when you are playing, and it's a bit tricky. I guess a good example would be, you hit 8 on a money board. That's the first time you hit 8. And you might go, well, I hit 8, it's time to province. But that might not be true. You might buy a gold first. Make your deck a little more consistent before diving into the provinces. And, of course, there is also greening too late, which is a little easier to explain. You have to keep in mind the ability of your opponent to also score, and you also kind of have to have a sense of timing. Better players tend to green later, and worse players tend to green too early. So I think if you'd rather green, you'd rather green too late than too early. It's easier to fix greening too late than it is to green too early. So always consider not buying a province over buying a province, or not scoring over scoring. Just see how much you can get away with building. Another caveat to note with this, of course, is when you have a bunch of money and you have a bunch of buys and gains and you want to keep building, sometimes it's nice just to buy a single province with whatever you're building. It kind of puts your opponent on the back foot to where your deck still got better, but you also scored. You don't have to just score or just build. You can do both at the same time. And sometimes just buying a single green province and then a bunch of cards and then double provincing next turn is a little scarier for your opponent, right? Because you just bought 3 provinces in 2 turns, and now your opponent's kind of on the back foot, right? So let's say you buy a single province and your opponent buys 2 provinces. Okay, now you buy 2 provinces. There are 3 provinces left, and now your opponent has this sticky situation where he can't buy a single province, because what if you double province again? And he can't really double province, because then you can just single province and buy a duchy and easily win. So sometimes it's a little better just to buy a single province and then also green. It's a very tricky tactic you can do, and not enough people do it, and it can be absolutely brutal if you do that correctly and you just draw deck every time. Of course, things don't always work out that way. People dud, or they don't draw everything, or they don't hit things, but we're talking about ideal world, so I think that's a pretty good thing to keep in mind. The third point also has to do with buying provinces, and that is uncreativity. People just kind of get lazy. Sometimes they'll see a board where an engine could work, but it seems like a lot of work and a lot of clicking, and you could just play money even though it's worse. And then they'll just play money and then lose to the guy who's willing to click more and build more. There's another kind of uncreativity. It's kind of an indicator for worse players, especially beginning players, where they kind of just don't understand just how much they can build on a board. They'll hit 8 and go, oh, I have to buy a province. And that's certainly greening too early, but it's not really a timing issue. It's just a mental issue. Well, if you don't have the experience or have the knowledge on how to build great decks, you should watch good players. You can follow them on the Dominion.games, or you can watch videos. There's tons of videos out there. Posting kingdoms on the Dominion Discord is a good idea. Asking, what could I have done better here? That sort of thing. Point 4 is buying silvers and golds. Now, I'm not saying never buy silver, and I'm not saying never buy gold, but beginning players buy these cards way too often, and they are designed to be worse than the kingdom cards. Like, in particular, buying silver in the opening is something you should really only do as kind of a last resort. And the reason for this is silvers prevent you from drawing your deck. They prevent you from doing more with your deck than you could do. Like, you could open Ironmonger Steward, and that's way better than opening Ironmonger Silver or Steward Silver. Like, you'll trash cards, you'll draw more, you'll cycle, you'll get around to your good cards faster, and you're also more likely to hit 5. The number one reason to open silver, of course, is to hit 5. So usually, if there isn't a good 5 cost, there's even less reason to buy silver, unless, of course, it's like an absolute crap game and there's just nothing going on. Always experiment with not opening silver, or opening with just 1 silver alongside an action card. Like, always keep that in mind, because it's usually better. Not always, but it's usually better. And, of course, golds. Buying golds is, like, one of the worst things you can do that's common. I mean, gold costs 6, and it doesn't generate that much value for its cost. There are so many 5-cost Dominion cards that are way more valuable, and they are also cheaper. Now, I'm not saying never buy gold. Sometimes you do just need a gold, and you'll just buy a gold. But usually err on the side of not buying a gold. It's much better to make that one mistake of not buying gold when you should have than to make 50 mistakes of buying gold when you shouldn't have. Point 5 is over-terminaling. I see people buy way too many action cards for what they plan on doing. I've seen this a lot, and you'd think it would be a kind of a common sense thing, but people don't really have a capability of what their decks are made out of, and I think that's what it comes down to, is just not knowing what your deck contents are or what you really want to do. I think it's just more of like an aimless sort of deal. You see this a lot with like night games, where people will buy like all of the knights on a board with no villages. Okay, so you can still only play 1 night card a turn, and all those knights in your deck just make it even harder for you to hit good price points. And you're just killing 1 card of your opponent's a turn. Like, that's not very good. Of course, there's Dame Molly and Sir Bailey, I think. You know, they're knights you can play non-terminally, but by and large, you know, like, that's just an example, right? Like, there are other examples. So the 6th point is always having to buy something or spend all possible money. I see this a lot, where, oh, I hit 8, I have to buy a province. No, you don't. You do not have to buy a province. You can buy a gold, you could buy an action card, which is way better probably. You don't have to spend all of your possible money. So if you have like 3 buys and $9, and the best card you can buy is 3 peddlers, you should probably buy 3 peddlers. And this again goes into what is best for your deck and not maximizing your economy. Of course, if you can maximize your economy and also do what's best for your deck, that's very efficient, but it's just better to do what's best for your deck. Somewhat infamously, Steph once had 12 or 11 bucks and a single buy, and he bought a Herbalist, which cost 2, but it was plus buy, and his deck needed plus buy. So that's the classic example of not spending all possible money. And of course, you don't have to buy anything. Buying is optional. If you have $3 and your deck really doesn't want another silver, don't buy another silver. Don't buy another card. If there's nothing good to buy, you don't have to buy anything. No one's forcing you at gunpoint to buy something. And I see people just buy stuff all the time, even when it's not good for their deck. Like, there are junky decks where I don't connect cards, and it's kind of crummy, but I don't want silver. You know, like, I hit 2. I don't really want this Pearl Diver. It doesn't work well against the Militia attack because it just makes it harder for me to know what I'm gonna draw. Yeah, stuff like that. You don't always have to buy stuff, so always consider that. Point 7 is building where it's impossible. This is kind of being too creative, where you have to be creative, but you also have to be grounded in reality. Where, you know, there's a board where there's Throne Room and Smithy. And you're thinking, well, I'm going to play 2 Throne Rooms and then Smithy and then Throne Room, and that's going to be like my own village. But there's no trashing, and it's only single province anyway. Like, you're trying too hard. You're still only going to be buying like a single province. So you have to keep stuff like that in mind, where sometimes it's just not realistic what you want to build, and you just kind of have to go, well, okay, I'm only buying a single province anyway. I'll build until I can hit single province somewhat consistently, and then I'll just province. The 9th point is not doing the big thing. And points 9 and 10 are pretty similar-ish in nature, but it's kind of like a 2-parter thing. So I'm gonna first explain the more practical side, where 9 is also somewhat similar to 3 in where there are 2 things you can do. You can either safely double province, or you can build really big and do like this mega triumph turn. You know, you can do the safe thing, and like there's like this weird wonky board where you could do like procession stuff, or you could just be safe and buy single province pretty consistently. And in both cases, it's probably better to try the big thing, unless you're in a tournament setting, because A, you get more experience trying the bigger stuff, and also B, it's more fun. People just kind of get scared, and they're like, I don't want to play this deck, because what if I mess it up? And this is where it kind of 9 goes into 10, which is playing scared, which is what we're going to talk about. You can't play scared. You cannot be afraid to lose. It's the single worst thing you can do to yourself if you play scared. Like, let's get an example. You're playing a ladder game, and you run into Steph, or you run into me or something, and you see their level. They're like level 64, and you're like, holy shit, I'm going to lose this game. You've already lost before you even played. Now, shuffles might put you back into the game. You're like, oh, I'm ahead, or they have really bad shuffles, or they underestimate you or something. But like, by and large, playing, like, they're people too. Like, there's a person on the other side, and they're also going, I wonder what's best here. My draws aren't looking so good. I'm behind currently, and you're thinking, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, I'm playing this guy the entire time, and it distracts you. I will say it also impedes your learning for multiple reasons. I would know because I've done this for a very long time, where I would run into a player of a certain level or higher, and I'd be like, oh shit, I'm definitely the underdog here. I think I'm going to open this. And then my opponent does something completely different. And my mind goes blank. And then I go, I had better do what he's doing because he's higher rated than me. And that's playing scared, and that's playing to lose. It's bad for multiple reasons. 1, what if he's messing up? You would have no idea. 2, you're trying something that you didn't even consider. So you're going to play it worse than him anyway. And 3, you're not even going to learn anything, really. You're just kind of following him. You're being a follower. You're not thinking for yourself. And that's probably the best way to not learn and also get tilted. And when you're tilted, you're just not going to learn anything at all, and you might as well stop playing. So, that's kind of the biggest thing holding me back, honestly, was point 10, playing scared. I don't know if that applies to everybody. There's some people that are just absolutely confident in how they read boards and all of that, but for the longest time, I was a lot like what I described. Those are my 10 points, and we're going to pivot now to Freaky.
Welcome everyone to the second part of the 20 common mistakes that lower rated players tend to make. I'll cover the second part of this, and let's just get right into it. The first point we have is over or under trashing. By that I mean over trashing in the sense of I'm already drawing my deck, now I'm trashing my coppers that I could use for economy instead of just buying more things to help me get going. So when you trash, you want to ask yourself if you need it to draw deck or not. For example, if I'm already drawing my deck and then I'm trashing, I'm gonna draw more than my deck, can I use that or not? And if the answer is no, and I still have the possibilities to do the trashing later, I probably want to use my cards right now for the economy, even if it's just copper instead of trashing. And on the flip side, under trashing, when you choose to just buy things when you could otherwise trash, being too afraid to take a turn that doesn't do a lot, and just trash cards to have better later turns. For the second point, missing pile outs, it's something you want to ask yourself in the, well, starting from turn 11 at the latest usually, is every turn you want to ask yourself, if I were to win this turn, how would I win? So you want to look at what piles are low, how many gains do I have, how many buys and how many cards that can gain stuff in your turn does my deck have, and how close can I get to potentially piling out this turn. You want to ask yourself this at the start of the turn, because otherwise you might end up missing a pile out if you only start thinking about it at the end of your turn. So that's a very important point. The third point, not tracking your deck capabilities, goes into that. If you don't understand how much can my deck do in one turn, how many provinces, how many things from piles can it get, you will miss these pile outs. And also on the flip side, you want to understand how much of that can my opponent do to not leave them those opportunities if you can prevent it. For the fourth point, we have not understanding power cards. By that, I mean cards that are generally by the community considered to be powerful. For that, you can, for example, look at the quiz list on Wikipedia, or probably better, in Dominion Discord, we have the Thunder Dominion, where in the pin post you have all these ratings for the separate expansions, which are rather accurate. And oftentimes when you look at the board, you want to ask yourselves, what are the best cards here? How can I use them? How do I get to them? For example, if you see Wolf or Recruiter as the best 5-cost cards, you want to ask yourself, how much is it worth for me to get to these cards? Do I open silver for it? Do I potentially even open double silver for it, which is rare? But so, for example, if you have good 5s, you don't want to get too trashing early game if you rather get to these strong 5-cost cards. So you already want to consider from the very get-go, how do I get to these power cards and how do I build my deck around them? That also goes into the fifth point, which is not planning your turn 3, turn 4 when you choose your openings. So as I mentioned, if you have these 5 costs that you want to consider them when you open already. You generally want to ask yourself, if I open this card and this card, how does my turn 3 look? How does my turn 4 look? And only if you're happy with that will you choose that opening. And so if you're not happy with that, you might want to consider other lines and then consider how those would look in turn 3, turn 4. Also, a common mistake is people open double terminal, maybe even just one terminal, and then they realize, oh, there's no village on the board, and I'd actually probably rather like to play another terminal as my one terminal on this board. So when you consider your opening buys, you also have to consider the overall availability of villages, because if that availability is low, you rather don't want to open terminal, that is cards that don't read +1 action at least, if you can help it. Sometimes it's still worth to just get a terminal card in the early game just to help you build faster, but it's something to be aware of and not overdo in case of terminals early game, if there aren't villages around. For the 7th point, we have spending too little time on figuring out how to maximize your turns. That is mostly gain and play. So if you have cards like, say, Ironworks, which can gain card costing up to 4, you want to consider how you can use those cards to potentially gain the cards in your turn and draw them in the same turn and then play them. So for example, I could Ironworks, another Ironworks, draw that Ironworks, and then also play it. And figuring out how to use those deck capabilities to your best advantage is probably one of the biggest differences between a low rated player and a high rated player, which also goes into the next point of undervaluing deck control. Deck control allows you to do these things because now you have the draw for it, now you have the reliability to do these things, and once you can start using those things, you will have much better turns. But that aspect only can happen if the deck and if the kingdom even just allows you to do these things. If the kingdom doesn't provide these opportunities, you might have just found yourself in a situation where you're over-trashed, point 1, because you can't use your extra draw. So when you want to trash, you want to consider how much do I benefit from this also long term by getting my deck into a shape where it's more reliable. Does my turn even do more now? Or maybe did it do more before? For the 9th point, wrong play order, what I mean by that is if you have multiple cards in your hand that you can play, playing the things in the order that is not optimal. Usually there is a clear order that is superior to other orders, and I made a video about this which should be linked in somewhere. First of all, you want to play the cards that draw non-terminally, so think of Laboratory and Seer and all of those cards. You want to play them first. Why do you want to play them first? Well, you don't lose anything playing them, and you gain more information about your deck, you gain more opportunities, more possibilities. After that, you want to play cards that draw terminally after that, after you play the cards that draw non-terminally first, if you even want to play them at all. Like, say you have a hand of 2 terminals that don't draw and perhaps a smithy, and you have 2 actions. Now you have to decide, do I want to play the smithy and perhaps risk not playing my terminal actions, both of them anyway, or do I just stop here and not play the smithy? This often comes down to what is left in my deck, meaning how many villages are in there, and it comes down to what do I need my turn to accomplish and how much payoff do I get from playing my non-drawing terminal actions. So that's something to always keep in mind, that maybe you just don't play them at all. And I think sometimes I see people play their draw even though it would be better to just stop and take what they already have in hand. Then you want to listen to the advice of playing cards that can sometimes draw last, which means cards that, for example, Wishing Well. Wishing Well gets better the closer you get to your discard pile, or the smaller the amount of cards in your deck, which means if you play the other cards first, the amount of cards in your deck is smaller, so you have more information, or you're just likelier to have a successful wish than at the start of your shuffle. Pretty simple, I think. Another thing is Herald, for example, which after drawing a card flips the top card and then plays it if it's an action. Also is a card that wants to be played last. Why? Well, let's say you have a Lost City and a Herald in hand, and we take the 2 cases of you play the Lost City first and then the Herald, and we take the case of playing the Herald first and then the Lost City. So, let's say we play the Lost City first. We draw 2 cards, Herald draws a card, and now flips a card from our top deck. So we have 4 card search space for an action card that continues our turn. Whereas if we play the Herald first, we only have 3 card search space, because the card we flip, if it's not an action, gets redrawn by the Lost City. So our chances of continuing our turn are much higher if we play the Herald last. Same thing applies for similar cards, of course. Another thing you want to know is that cards that make your opponent choose something, for example Advisor or Envoy, you want to play them as soon as you possibly can. Again, maybe you don't play the Envoy at all, so if at all, same thing as drawing terminally. Why? Well, you give your opponent more information about what you want in your hand. If you, for example, play 3 villages before you play your Advisor, your opponent is probably thinking, well, I guess he doesn't need a village, he probably needs a terminal draw card, so he denies you the draw card. Whereas if you hadn't played those villagers before, he would have a harder choice making a good decision. Same thing for Envoy, same thing for Advisor. Another thing is cards that make you choose, as opposed to your opponent, should be played as late as you possibly can. So basically anything that remodels or anything that has to do with a decision that doesn't just draw cards or generate coins, play them as late as you possibly can, just to better know what you need right now. Now again. And then for our last point, we have the lack of deck tracking. By that I mean to not be aware of what is left in your deck. At each point in your turn, you want to know what cards are left in my deck. That's not just for cards like Wishing Well, where you have to guess a card, but it's also just, oh, it's turn 3, I have, say, 3 coppers in my hand. Next turn, I'm gonna draw the other 4 because I have a card that draws 2, for example, on turn 4. If I draw it, I probably want to buy a 3 cost now and then a 4 cost later, or stuff like that. Or if I have 4 money on turn 3, I probably don't want to buy the 3 cost if I also plan on getting the 4 cost. Just very simple examples of knowing your deck, knowing what's coming up, to choose what card you buy now, and also just to know, do I play on in my turn or not? Do I stop here? Is it better to leave the cards that are on top or not? Or do I have to play on to prevent a bad turn? This general awareness of what your deck still contains will make a huge difference in your improvement in the game. And that's it from me. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time.